during the time before it was introduced, school had to deal with introduction of whole ideas, okay, which by nature would be simultaneously integrating whole disciplines like math, science, language, art. All of these would be something that would be put together into a collective of how to figure. So when you do math, then you would be doing not only math, but you would be doing literature at the same time, because they would be introducing principles of literature that would have mathematical bases in it. Or if you're doing literature, you would be doing, or art, there would be mathematics involved in it. And there was this well-rounded education. But then what they did was very, very, very devious. But when you're ready to control someone, what do? You make sure that whole ideas become fragmented or fractured, okay? So this would then destroy or fragment it into intellectual capsules. So what you have from old ideas, after you fragmented it, it becomes subjects. So whole ideas now became subjects, which did not, or at least marginally, existed at that time. So how do you teach subjects? Well, if you want to fragment someone's thinking so that they can't put two and two together, or they don't have an understanding of the totality of what a subject would mean from so many different mental vectors, how many different ways to look at it, well, then what you do is you make sure that you turn from education and teaching into programming. And how do you program? Well, Pavlov taught you how to program. That's what he did with the dogs. He ring a bell, which would then teach the dog when it was ready to eat, and the dog would begin to salivate. Well, that's essentially what they did from Pavlov's behavioral conditioning and his experiments on behavioral conditioning. What they did was introduce the bell into the school, so that here you are teaching, and what happens? Ding, ding, you're in the middle of a subject matter, you're trying to teach, and ding, ding, you shut the book down. In the middle of the thought, it just shuts off. Boom. That's how you train somebody. That's how you mind control somebody. You fragment them by making sure that the thought does not have a conclusion, that there's no closer to the thought, that there's no looping the thought from its beginning point back to its to an end point and then back to its beginning again, so that it has a totality of meaning, and then you link all the dots together and you have a whole concept. Well, the way to do that is to break up children's thinking and concentration into these little subjects, so they get a little piece here, a little piece there, but the little pieces are never taught to be connected to each other. Each subject becomes a kind of quantum by itself. So you have somebody who would then become an expert in math, but be just a jackass when it comes to reasoning in another area. So what you have are people that you can control, because now they don't have the ability or the critical ability and critical apparatus or the critical thinking process, or developed the critical thinking process to be able to solve their own problems. And how wonderful is that when you have politicians who put a whole lot of mumbo-jumbo out there, and the people now who don't have an ability to connect the dots about how a subject is formed and what it is you really mean when you speak about this A, B, C, D, or the budget, or the society and terrorism. When the people don't have an understanding of how to put two and two together, you have a well-controlled populace. They don't have the ability to tell you that you're full of it, because we see what you're doing even with the words that you're speaking. So children were not allowed to think at leisure upon thoughts and subjects, because they were incessantly being interrupted by loud bells and horns at about every half hour. And how do you learn anything by that time? You don't learn anything at that point. So I'm not sure where you want me to go with this any further, because I
have a question for you,
to find out what it is the people themselves would want, and I'm not going to answer from that point.
I have a question for you, Dr. Valentine.
Mm-hmm.
The call-in number is 646-200-0067. The great Dr. Phil Valentine is on air with us today. I'm going to throw a name out at you and let the audience know who this gentleman is. Friedrich Froebel.
Friedrich Froebel was the German who created kindergarten. And kindergarten, or Kindergarten, was a way of harvesting, or first planting the seeds of little children, so that they will sprout and grow in the soil and in the garden of your choice. He said that the primary way to begin the conditioning of children's minds are to separate them from their mothers. And that whatever it is that you're teaching them, you have to teach them that the teacher now becomes the authority over the mother. And that to pull them away or to separate them or to have them go through the traumatic experience of not naturally breaking free from the mother, but putting them very early when they're more malleable and more open to suggestions, the suggestions that you're supposed to be giving to them from family, from mother, from a sense of community. That all goes now. You introduce an alien artifact, which is the concept of government and state and the fact that you belong to the state. And the child now sees the state as the authority, or is brought up to believe through the reward and punishment and reward system of the state apparatus that the state has more power than the parent. And so when you take that, when Froebel taught that when you take the child away from the mother, that's why they were introducing legislation, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, to get the child at 6 months now. The state wanted to put out a law that after 6 months, you're supposed to have your child report to a conditioning center, a pre-childhood or preschool conditioning center where the 6-month-old child would be introduced to stimuli that the state would provide for that child.
Early programming, for lack of a better word.
That's correct.
Brother Valentine, we're going to take a quick time out. Welcome back to the Phil Valentine Show. The call-in number is 646-200-0067. We're back with Brother Phil right now. Brother Phil, are you still there?
Yes, sir.
I have a question about, I'm getting some type of terrible feedback. I have a question. Public schools versus private schools in today's society. What's your opinion on that?
Well, it depends on who the private person is or who is initiating the private curriculum. When we talk about private curriculum, it would be something that the parents would sit down and actually work towards doing that. Most people think that a Catholic school education is a private school education, although it is one of the better forms of education that is out there, because I was a child of Catholic school education back in the days. They also have conformed a lot of their curriculum to the Prussian mindset, especially when it comes in Catholic schools, or so-called private schools, they call it, since you're paying for it, nothing private about it. True private schools are the ones that are set up by the community, set up by the mothers and fathers of that community, and those who elect the teachers, as they did back in the days. When the teachers were essentially elected, they went and they got an education and came back into the community, and they got to meet the community, sat down with the men and women in the community, and got the instructions for what they wanted to see the children turn out like, what values they wanted to be reinforced, what history they wanted to be reinforced, the type of mathematics, essentially what they taught as economics, geometry, philosophy, literature. All of that was actually given by the parents to the teacher to teach the children. So we don't have a true private school system. What we do have is an alternative school system. So in true private schools, when we see those happen, then we will have had the protocols that I've just laid out. Those would be the issuing protocols, the standing protocols for true private school system.
Yes, sir. Brother Valentine, I'm going to read something to you. And actually, I got this from your excellent lecture, Lockdown USA. William Torrey Harris, U.S. Commissioner of Education, said, American schools are scientifically designed to prevent overeducation from happening. What do you think he meant by that quote?
Well, he was talking to a railroad magnate, I believe it was Covington.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that to him because at the time, Covington was concerned about the fact that the people who were being educated in America at the time, he remembered how education was in America, that the education system would not allow for the type of worker that he needed, which was essentially somebody to sling a hammer. And the fact that the slaves at that time, or the freed slaves at that time, were not skilled enough or were skilled enough, but they wanted to put the poor